Have you ever been in one of those conversations, maybe an argument, where it just feels off? Like you're both talking, but you're not really connecting.
Yeah, like you're speaking different languages almost, even though you're using the same words. It gets frustrating fast.
Exactly. You feel like maybe the basic rules you thought you both agreed on just, well, aren't shared at all. And you start wondering, is this discussion even possible?
Mhm.
Well, today we're diving into a piece that leans right into that feeling. It's called State Violence, the Futility of Debate.
And it makes a really provocative claim, doesn't it?
It really does. It basically argues that some debates, specifically those touching on state power, aren't just hard.
Mm.
They're fundamentally pointless.
Pointless because there's this, like, unbridgeable gap,
Mhm.
a core moral conflict that you just can't resolve through talking.
That's the idea. So our mission today is to really unpack that argument. We want to explore why the source says these debates are futile.
And look at the examples they give, which are quite striking.
Definitely. We'll dig into the claims about inconsistency and what the author thinks is the real hurdle when you try to engage with these specific viewpoints.
It's a perspective that might make you rethink how you approach disagreements, for sure.
But just a quick important point before we jump in.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Our role here is purely to explore and understand the argument presented in this source. We aren't taking sides. We're not endorsing any political stance.
Nope. We're just laying out the logic, the claims, the implications as the author sees them. We want to help you understand this specific perspective impartially.
Right. We're navigating their line of reasoning so you can see how they arrive at their conclusions.
Okay, ready to get into it.
Let's do it. So the core idea that makes this piece so challenging, it starts with a really stark premise.
It really does.
The central claim is this: trying to debate people who openly endorse state violence, and the source lumps things like border control, gun control, even taxation into this category. It's just pointless.
Utterly futile is the word they use. And the reason they give is pretty intense.
Yeah, why? Because, in the author's view, the fundamental moral question has already been settled, or rather, abandoned by the other side. They see these positions as condoning aggression against innocent people. Full stop.
And the analogy they use to hammer this home is, well, it's designed to shock, I think.
Tell us about that.
They basically compare debating these issues to trying to have a rational chat with someone who says, yeah, it's perfectly fine to murder and eat my neighbors.
Wow, okay.
The point they're making is that once someone accepts what the author defines as immoral state violence, in this case, there's no shared moral foundation left to build on.
So it's not just, oh, we see the facts differently.
No, not at all. It's we operate in different moral universes. In their view, the very basis for ethical agreement has been destroyed. You've crossed a fundamental line.
Okay, that's a powerful, if jarring, way to frame it. What does that actually mean for the conversation, though? How does that breakdown play out according to the source?
It means the standard tools of debate, like logic, evidence, appealing to shared values, they just don't work anymore.
Because there are no shared values at that fundamental level.
Exactly. The source argues that if one side is okay with initiating violence against peaceful people for some perceived greater good, the whole idea of a common moral code just collapses.
So you're not arguing about, say, the economic effects of immigration anymore.
Right. You're actually arguing about whether it's okay to use force against someone who hasn't harmed anyone. And from the author's standpoint, that's not really a debatable point. It's a foundational moral axiom.
Okay, I see how that leads to the futility claim. If that's the starting block, then it makes sense that the author doesn't just leave it there. They go deeper into what they see as hypocrisy and inconsistency.
Oh, absolutely. This is a major part of the argument. They look at specific positions they label as statist.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, so take border control. The author points out that advocates often justify using force against immigrants, detention, deportation, by saying it's necessary to protect society or maintain order.
Okay, a common argument.
But then, the source says, look at many of those same people when it comes to gun control. They might fiercely oppose restrictions, using arguments like, don't punish all gun owners for the actions of criminals, or don't restrict my rights based on what someone else might do.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Exactly. The author sees a direct contradiction. They're saying, wait, you reject collective punishment for gun owners, but you embrace it for immigrants.
It's applying a different standard based on the group.
Precisely. And they flip it, too. They note that many gun control advocates argue for restricting access to guns to prevent potential future harm, a kind of collectivist safety argument.
Right.
But then some of those same people might support strict border controls, effectively using the same logic, restrict the freedom of this group, immigrants, for the perceived safety of the collective that they just applied to gun owners.
So inconsistency on both sides, according to this view.
Yes. The core critique revolves around this idea called the non-aggression principle.
Can you quickly explain that?
Sure. It's a central idea in libertarian thought. Basically, it says it's morally wrong to initiate force or fraud against another person or their property. Aggression is only justified in self-defense.
Got it.
So, from the source's perspective, supporting things like border control or gun control means you're selectively abandoning this principle. You're saying initiating force is okay, but only when it serves your preferred outcome.
And this is why the author argues that even some self-described libertarians who support border control aren't really libertarians in their view because they violate this core tenet.
That's exactly the claim. It's seen as a fundamental betrayal of the principle.
Okay, so it's not just about having different priorities. It's presented as a deep, principled inconsistency, almost like picking and choosing when basic rights apply.
Yeah, sort of a rules for thee, but not for me, when it comes to who gets subjected to initiated force.
Which logically brings us back to why debate seems futile to the author. If the other side is seen as operating without consistent principles.
Then what's the point of arguing the details? The source mentions people suggesting debates with figures like Dave Smith, Lawrence Southern, Stephen Molyneux.
Right, prominent figures in certain circles.
But the author predicts how those debates would inevitably end. They believe the opponent would eventually have to concede that, yes, they are okay with initiating violence against innocent people in specific circumstances.
And for the author, that's game over.
Checkmate, essentially. Because the moral line, in their view, has been openly crossed. There's nothing left to debate once that admission is made.
So this leads to what the author identifies as the actual challenge here. It's not what we usually think of as debating.
No, it's quite different. They argue it's not about winning arguments on statistics or history or policy consequences.
Which is what most political debates focus on.
Right. Instead, the source says the real task is to force proponents of state violence to clearly state their actual position on initiating force.
To make them articulate the principle or lack thereof behind their stance.
Exactly. And the author believes most people holding these views avoid doing that explicitly.
Why?
Because, according to the source, getting specific reveals what the author sees as their inherent hypocrisy and their inconsistent application of principles around violence. It exposes the uncomfortable foundation.
So the core issue isn't practical outcomes, it's the fundamental moral stance on aggression itself.
That's the crux of it. Morality versus pragmatism.
Can you expand on that? How does the source draw that line?
Well, they argue that trying to debate what might happen, the potential consequences of open borders versus closed borders, for example, is irrelevant if the policy itself relies on what they define as immoral violence.
The means invalidate the ends, essentially.
From their perspective, yes. The ethical foundation is rotten, so arguing about the structure built on top is pointless.
And they use another thought experiment here, don't they? A pretty extreme one.
It's extremely provocative, yeah. They basically say, look, if you follow what they call statist logic, the idea that the ends justify the means, that violence is okay for a perceived greater good,
Okay.
then theoretically, someone could justify, say, exterminating all border control advocates to achieve a freer society using that same logic.
That's a very dark path.
It is. But then the author immediately pulls back and says, but we wouldn't do that. Why? Because their principle, the non-aggression principle, forbids initiating such violence regardless of the potential outcome.
Ah. So the thought experiment isn't an endorsement. It's meant to highlight a perceived contradiction.
Precisely. It's designed to show what they see as the dangerous inconsistency in statist thinking. Condemning violence in theory,
Yeah.
or when it's used against them, but condoning it when they want to use it for their goals.
It really forces the question. If you are willing to initiate force for a specific good, where do you draw the line? And what principle makes your line valid if you've already discarded non-aggression?
That's the challenge it throws down. It demands a consistent moral framework.
And just to round out the argument, the source mentions a next step, right? Something practical they plan to do.
Yeah, they apparently plan to release a follow-up video. The idea is to pose very basic, specific questions about initiating force to border control advocates.
And the prediction?
The prediction stated in the source is that none of them will provide honest, consistent answers, which, for the author, would just further prove their point about the futility of trying to debate these issues.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you listening right now? How might this change how you think about difficult conversations?
Well, this deep dive really pushes us to think about the assumptions people bring to the table, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are we arguing about facts and figures, or is there something deeper going on?
Like, are we hitting a wall because our fundamental moral starting points are just completely different? Maybe you felt that frustration in a discussion.
hmm And this source suggests that feeling might not be about what you're saying, but about the fundamental ground you're standing on or that the other person is standing on.
So, just to recap the core insight from the author's perspective, they argue that productive debates aren't really possible with those who endorse state violence.
Right, because in their view, those positions aren't based on consistent principles. They see them as opportunistic, relying on hypocrisy, and a selective use of ideas like non-aggression.
It's a strong claim.
It is, and it leaves us, and you, with a really important question to mull over.
Yeah, think about this in your own life. When you're in a disagreement, how do you tell the difference?
How do you figure out if it's a debate where you can actually find common ground and understanding versus one where you've hit that fundamental moral chasm the source describes, where maybe shared principles just aren't there?
And maybe even before that, what responsibility do we have to try and understand the core principles someone else is operating from before we even start trying to argue with them?
It's a lot to think about. Where does productive conversation end, and where does an unbridgeable difference begin?